Hello biology students! Today we are going to be starting chapter 7 notes which are on cells. Today we are going to go through the notes for chapter 1 section 1. I will be posting these slides on Google Classroom separately, so if you want to go through and take the notes from there where it might be a bit easier to read than the camera picking up a screen, you are more than welcome to do so. But today we are going to be starting out with cell theory. So we have a cell theory. Cell theory states that every living organism is made of one or more cells. Cell theory states that the cell is the basic unit of structure and function. And cell theory states that all cells arise from pre-existing cells. These three pieces of information we can back with huge numbers of experiments, huge amounts of research. We're quite certain of this, so this rises to the level of theory. So the reason why it is called cell theory and not cell fact is theory is the highest level of support that something can have within science. So it is cell theory, not cell fact. So we're going to go through some early people who worked out and figured things out about cells. One of the first person, or possibly the first person to observe cells, was Robert Hooke. So Robert Hooke was this guy, and back in 1665 he had this crude microscope where they didn't have electric light, they had to burn oil lamps, and we're using the flask of water as a magnifier to get the light on the specimen, but he looked through a thin slice of cork wood, the wood that you'd use to stopper a bottle, and when he looked through the dead cork wood, he saw all these little boxes. All the little boxes reminded him of the rooms that monks and nuns lived in at monasteries and convents, so he called them cells. So that is why the cell is called a cell. It's because Robert Hooke thought it looked like the room that a monk or a nun lived in. So there was this guy who I'm including because his name is awesome, Antoine van Leeuwenhoek. He found cells in pond water in 1873 and sketched some of what he saw. I'm hoping that when I have you guys back that the river is still warm enough that I can get us a little bit of pond water to look at because it is fun stuff. So Leeuwenhoek sketched some microscopic, some macroscopic things that were in water, and then figured out that they were made of cells. So Theodor Schwann observed cells in animals in 1839. Schlenden was a biologist, observed cells in plants. By the 1850s, we were pretty confident that, yeah, it seems like all living tissue is made of this basic subunit of the cell. So I'm going to skip over this section on microscopes. You might have some questions on it in your reading, but we're going to talk about microscopes when we do our first lab. So I'm going to skip over these slides for today, and we will talk about that when we get into lab. So moving up to cell types. So there's a huge diversity in cells. Even within our bodies, there's a huge diversity of different cell types. My muscle fibers, which are muscle cells, are very different from my skin cells, which are very different from my neurons in my brain, which are very different from my erythrocytes, which are my red blood cells, moving oxygen, which are very different from my leukocytes, my white blood cells. So there's a huge range of different cells in different sizes, there's different shapes, different functions. So I showed you this at the start of the year. Oh, I should have done British English. So if we zoom in, so here we get down to the thickness of paper, width of your hair. So there are single cells, there are amoeba that are large enough they can be seen with the naked eye. They're not super common. Then there's things like dust mites, which are made of many, many cells, which you can barely see with your naked eye. Human egg is a single cell. Skin cell, single cell. Red blood cells are quite a bit smaller. Bacteria, which are single-celled organisms, are quite a bit smaller even than the blood cells. Viruses, which are not cells, are going to be generally much smaller than bacteria. So cells come in a big range of sizes, shapes, and functions, but they have a few things in common. All cells have this molecule of inheritance. They all have DNA. What subunit makes up DNA is going to be the question you have to answer now. So, next we come to the cell membrane. All cells are surrounded by a thin, flexible barrier called a cell membrane. So the cell membrane is made of mostly lipids. It has some proteins embedded in it that do different functions. It has some carbohydrates attached. But your cell membrane is mostly lipids. The big division that we have in life is between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So we have these two large domains of life of prokaryotes and eukaryotes. This classification is based upon a single fact, which is, does the organism have a nucleus where it stores its DNA, or does it not have a nucleus where it stores its DNA? So a nucleus is a large membrane bound structure that contains the cell's genetic materials in the form of DNA. The nucleus controls most of the cell's activities in eukaryotes. So this DNA is the molecule of inheritance. It holds all the genes, it controls the production of proteins. So there are eukaryotes are cells that have their DNA in a nucleus. So animals, we are animals, plants, fungi, they have their DNA stored in a nucleus. So animals and plants, fungi, they are all eukaryotes. Eukaryotes just means that they have their DNA in a nucleus. The other domain of life is prokaryotes. So we have this other domain of prokaryotes. They're much simpler. They still use DNA as their genetic material. However, this DNA is not stored within the confines of a cell nucleus. So prokaryotes would be what you would generally call bacteria. There's another domain of archaea, which are more similar to the prokaryotes, but we're not going to talk about archaea at this time because your book does not bring them up at this point. So, all life descends from a common ancestor. So we have the bacteria and the archaea have been around the longest. Then we share lineage with the eukaryotes, the plants, the fungi, fish, shark, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, all of the various clades of animal life. So, this is going to finish off our cell notes for today. I'm going to give you a short reading assignment. Thanks. Have a good day.